This is the most terrifying unsolved mystery that has haunted a small town for 68 years. In the summer of 1954, a boy never returned home from summer camp. He was only 14 years old when he disappeared without a trace, and neither his body nor any evidence of his disappearance was ever found. To this day, no one knows what happened to him, not even his own parents. And believe it or not, there are so many unanswered questions surrounding his case that continue to baffle investigators to this very day. So here's the disturbing story of the boy who never returned from summer camp. It all started in the summer of 1954 in the small town of Bradford, Vermont. At the time, there were roughly just 2,000 residents who all knew each other on a first-name basis. And it was here where a young boy named Jack lived with his family. His mother, Helen, worked at a local hotel, and his father owned a quarry. And by all accounts, they were a happy family with no signs of trouble. In fact, Jack had such a good relationship with his parents that when he told them he wanted to go to summer camp, they agreed without hesitation. It was during the summer of 1954 that Jack would attend his very first summer camp, and before he left, he was incredibly excited. But it wasn't long after he arrived at Camp John Hay that his spirits were dampened. You see, right away, Jack didn't get along with the other campers. He was described as being a little odd and different, and he never really fit in. And so just 2 days after arriving, he called his mom and asked if he could come home, but she convinced him to stay just a few more days. And she promised that she would come visit him. But while she was on the phone with him, something strange happened. She heard a commotion in the background and a voice that yelled, "Don't hang up." And then immediately after, the call disconnected. Helen tried calling back, but the line was dead. She assumed that the staff had taken the phone away from him, because they didn't want the campers using it. But then several hours went by, and still she hadn't heard from him, so she called the camp director to ask if everything was all right. And what she heard next made her blood run cold. The director told her that Jack had never been seen since he'd called her earlier that day. Helen immediately panicked and drove to the camp as fast as she could. But upon arrival, she was met with an incredible scene. All of the tents were empty, and the camp was completely deserted. It turned out that the camp had been abruptly closed down due to low enrollment numbers, and all of the counselors had gone home. This meant that Jack was now alone in the camp with no adult supervision. Helen spent hours searching for her son, but she couldn't find him anywhere. She checked every tent, every cabin, and every building, but there was no sign of Jack, and this led her to believe that he may have run away. So she reported him missing, and the police launched a massive search effort. They combed through the surrounding areas, but they couldn't find any sign of Jack. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, it became more and more apparent that he was truly gone. To this day, no one knows what happened to Jack, but there are a few theories that investigators have put forth over the years. One of the leading theories is that Jack was kidnapped by an unknown person or persons, and there is some evidence to support this claim. For example, there were tire tracks found near the camp that couldn't be matched to any vehicle. And there were also several strange men who were seen loitering around the camp in the days leading up to Jack's disappearance. However, another theory is that Jack simply ran away from camp and is still out there somewhere living under a false identity. After all, he had been struggling to fit in and make friends before his disappearance, and it's possible that he just wanted to start a new life somewhere else. There is also another dark theory that suggests that Jack was the victim of foul play at the hands of someone he knew. This is because in the days following his disappearance, several people came forward with strange information. One man claimed that he saw Jack arguing with a counselor named Joe in the days leading up to his disappearance. And another man claimed that he saw Jack's body being loaded into the trunk of a car. However, these sightings couldn't be verified, and there was no physical evidence to support them. What makes this case particularly disturbing is that there are so many unanswered questions that continue to haunt Jack's family and the investigators to this day. For example, why did the camp close down so suddenly? Why were all of the counselors gone? And why did Jack call his mother on the phone if he intended to run away? Unfortunately, we may never know the answers to these questions, which makes this case one of the most terrifying unsolved mysteries of our time. As you can imagine, Jack's parents were absolutely devastated when their son disappeared. They never stopped searching for him, and they never gave up hope that he would be found alive. Sadly, though, Jack's father passed away, believing that his son was still out there somewhere, and his mother died believing that he was murdered. And as the years passed, other children in the small town began to wonder about Jack's disappearance. What happened to the boy who never came home from summer camp? And did he really have anything to do with the creepy abandoned camp in the woods? Or perhaps the camp had nothing to do with his disappearance at all. One local resident recalls hearing rumors about the case when he was just a young boy. He remembers hearing the adults in town talking about the case in hushed tones, trying to figure out what happened to the boy. And it seemed that everyone had their own theories about what happened to him, but no one could say for sure. Another resident remembers visiting the abandoned camp as a teenager and feeling a sense of unease while he was there. He said that it felt like something bad had happened there, and that he could unshake the feeling that someone was watching him. While he was there, he and his friends explored the tents and cabins, and they even found some old clothing that appeared to belong to Jack. But despite their best efforts, they were unable to find any evidence that could help solve the mystery of what happened to him. For many years, the case went cold and it seemed as though Jack's disappearance would never be solved. But in recent years, there has been a renewed interest in the case. In 2013, a documentary was released that covered the details of Jack S.'s disappearance, and it brought the case to the attention of a whole new generation. Since then, there have been several attempts to locate Jack, but unfortunately none of them have been successful. Today, the camp where Jack disappeared is nothing but a pile of rubble. It was demolished many years ago, and all that remains is a clearing in the woods. Despite the demolition, though, the legend of Jack and the mystery surrounding his disappearance lives on in the small town. To this day, many people believe that Jack was murdered and that his body is buried somewhere on the former campgrounds. Others believe that he ran away and is living under a different name. But the truth is, no one knows what happened to him, and his case remains one of the most terrifying unsolved mysteries in American history. Jack's disappearance had a profound impact on the small town of Bradford, Vermont. It was a tight-knit community where everyone knew each other, and when one of their own went missing, it shook them to their core. The town was never the same after Jack S.'s disappearance, and the shadow of his unsolved case still looms over the community today. The impact of Jack's disappearance on the community was immediate and profound. It was a small town where everyone knew each other, and when one of their own went missing, it created a sense of fear and uncertainty that had never been felt before. Parents were afraid to let their children out of their sight, and the innocence of childhood seemed to disappear overnight. The tight-knit community was torn apart by the mystery, and everyone had their own theories about what happened to Jack. Some believed that he had been kidnapped, while others thought that he had run away from home. The truth was that no one knew what happened, and the lack of answers only fueled the fire of speculation. In the years that followed, the case of the boy who never returned from summer camp became a local legend. People from all over came to the small town to try to solve the mystery, but unfortunately, none of them were successful. The case went cold and Jack's body was never recovered. If you enjoyed this video, then check out these other scary videos. And as always, thanks for watching. Welcome back to my channel. Today's scary story is called The Shadow in the Hallway Mirror. Make sure to listen to this one with the lights on. Our next Reddit user says, "My parents are stubborn. When we moved into our new home last year, they asked us if we wanted to take down the mirror in the hallway. It was a huge ornate antique mirror, and so they offered it to a friend who didn't want it. So they were going to throw it out anyway. However, when they were about to do so, our dad asked, what if we put it up in our bedroom instead? Of course, we said that would be fine. And the next week it was hanging in our parents' room. We thought nothing of it until one night I had to get up to go to the bathroom. Naturally, I flipped the light switch at the end of the hall. As I walked by the mirror, I could see the vague shape of a woman in the reflection standing behind my parents. She looked almost exactly like our mom. I assumed she must have been a friend or a family friend who came over while I was asleep. But then I heard a scratching noise from behind the mirror. Then I heard our mom scream. This sound was definitely not like her. I got scared and ran away. I didn't think much of it until a few days later, when I had to go to the bathroom again in the middle of the night. This time I grabbed a flashlight, because I was afraid to flip the light switch. As I walked by the mirror, I saw the same shadow again. I shone the flashlight directly on the mirror, and it disappeared. Since then, I haven't seen it again, but I hear my parents fighting more than usual. Also, they're getting a divorce. Maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe it's not. Our next Reddit user says, "This happened many years ago when I was 8 years old. We had an enormous antique mirror that stood over 7 feet tall and took up most of one wall in our house. I remember this thing vividly, the ornate gold frame and how its glass was slightly tinted. Anyway, we always kept the light off in that room, unless someone needed to use the mirror. But one night I woke up and needed to go to the bathroom. On the way, I had to pass through the mirror room, and of course, the door was shut, but a sliver of light was coming underneath it. Curiosity got the best of me, and I opened the door. To my surprise, the light in the room wasn't coming from the hallway. The door had a frosted glass panel in the center, and I could vaguely make out a figure standing in front of it with its back to me. I remember thinking, how can there be a light in here, and no power. I screamed and ran. That's the only time I ever saw anything supernatural. Let's keep going. Our next Reddit user says, growing up, we had a massive antique mirror in the hallway outside of my parents' bedroom. It was always off limits, since it was fragile and apparently extremely valuable. I never questioned this rule, but one day when I was homesick from school, I decided to sneak out of bed and go investigate. I don't know what I expected to find, but it wasn't what I actually saw. I tiptoed quietly down the hall and approached the mirror. I had to crane my neck to look over the top of it, which was at least 6 feet tall. What I saw was my own shocked face staring back at me. I felt my heart stop for a moment. I'd only made it halfway down the hall. The mirror was still standing straight up. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was just my reflection, but as I got closer, I saw the edges of my reflection start to curl, like how water ripples around a stone dropped into a pond. I backed away, tripping over my own feet. I screamed bloody murder and ran all the way downstairs. The entire time I could feel eyes boring into my back, willing me to turn around and look back at the mirror. Once safely tucked away downstairs, I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just a trick of the light. But then something strange started happening. Things began moving around the house without anyone being there. Drawers slid open and slammed shut. Objects fell off shelves and then rebalanced themselves. Doors opened and closed on their own. I started seeing things in my peripheral vision, too. I never turned to look, but I saw shadows moving just beyond my sight. It was like the house itself was trying to communicate with me, warning me to stay away. My mom eventually found me curled up on the couch watching TV, sweating and shaking. She sat with me and reassured me that everything was okay. When she went upstairs to check on things, she found that the mirror was lying on the floor, shattered into a million pieces. She also found other things knocked over. As far as we know, the mirror is still broken. No one wants to fix it. Our next Reddit user says, I grew up with a big mirror in my hallway. It was the kind of thing you'd see in an old Victorian house. We had one floor above us, so the mirror reached all the way from the floor to the ceiling. One night I was getting a drink and I had to walk past the mirror. The lights were dim in the hallway. There weren't any overhead lights. The only light was coming from the lamps in my living room and my parents' bedroom. In the mirror, I saw a man wearing a 1940s style suit holding a briefcase. He seemed to be sitting down. He didn't seem to acknowledge me. I didn't really think much of it. I thought maybe he was a relative of mine, because the mirror was really old and I didn't know much about my family tree. A couple of months later, I heard some shuffling around above me. I was getting ready for bed, and I could unreally focus on what I was doing because of the noises above me. I asked my mom if she knew what the commotion was, and she said she'd ask my dad. Her and my dad shared a room, so they'd probably be able to hear better. Later that night, I was getting another drink of water. I noticed that the light from the lamp in my parents' room had changed from yellow to white. The light bulb hadn't burned out though. I was curious, and I walked to the door and stopped. I could hear my parents talking very loudly. They weren't yelling, but they were clearly upset. I could make out the words moving day, and the attic. I thought it was weird that they were talking about moving when we just bought the house less than a year ago. I pushed the door open and walked in. My parents were packing up boxes. Why are we moving? Are we moving? I asked. My mom turned around and said, We're not moving, honey. It's just that your dad and I need to talk in the attic. I didn't know if it was because I was young, but I could have sworn that the room looked different. The beams in the ceiling looked like coffins. Instead of running to the attic, I wandered back to my room. I couldn't help but stare at the mirror. In the mirror, I saw a man in a 1940s suit holding a briefcase. He looked up and stared at me. I could see his mouth move, but I couldn't hear anything. I think he was trying to warn me. I ripped off the curtains and covered the mirror. I never spoke to him again. Thanks for watching. If you like this series, check out part 14. All the stories in this series are scary, but some are more terrifying than others. And you can vote in the pinned comment which one scared you the most. See you next time. They say that if you listen carefully, you can hear the whispers of those buried beneath your feet. Now, imagine that. Every time you take a step, you're greeted by voices from beyond the grave. It would be unsettling, to say the least. But what if these whispers were coming not from the cemetery, but from your own house? It sounds like something out of a horror movie, but for some people, it's their everyday reality. Welcome back, everyone. Today we'll explore the dark secret behind one house built directly over a burial ground. What secrets does this house hold, and why should you never, ever build a home in a graveyard? The first thing you should know is that the construction of houses on top of graves is actually quite common. Why, you might ask? Well, it has everything to do with economics. Building a house on a plot of land is much cheaper than purchasing an empty plot and building a house from scratch. As a result, many people are willing to overlook the potential consequences of such a decision. After all, how bad could it be? In some cases, it's not bad at all. The previous inhabitants of the property may have been kind, peaceful people whose spirits, if they even believe in them, are content to remain where they lived for so long. For others, however, the ghosts that haunt their homes are malevolent, jealous spirits who will stop at nothing to make their presence felt. One such individual is Helen Acton, a resident of New Orleans, Louisiana. Her home was once a bustling funeral home owned by her great-grandfather in the early 20th century. The home had been in her family for generations before they finally sold it, and although the new owners had no knowledge of the home's history, they soon learned about it when strange things started happening. Helen had heard stories about the house from her relatives, who claimed that her great-grandfather kept bodies in the basement before burying them in the backyard. This is a grim practice in itself, but it was also illegal, which only added to the mystery. Who was this man, and why did he go to such lengths to hide his activities? When the new owner went to the local court, they discovered the answer. Not only had Helen's great-grandfather engaged in illicit activities, but there were also rumors that he had built his house on a Native American burial ground. This detail only added to the intrigue surrounding the property and made it all the more difficult to sell. But eventually, someone came along who was willing to overlook the potential dangers of living in a haunted house. Helen moved into the home with her husband, 2 children, and dog. She was excited to start a new chapter in her life and raise her family in a place full of character and charm. However, she soon realized that the house had its own ideas about who was in charge. Strange things started happening almost immediately after they moved in. Doors slammed shut, objects flew across the room, and disembodied voices echoed through the halls. Even her dog seemed uneasy in the house, refusing to go upstairs or into certain rooms. Helen tried to ignore these occurrences at first, chalking them up to the age of the house, or perhaps just an overactive imagination. But as time went on, the events became more frequent and more intense. She began to feel a constant sense of dread and fear that permeated every aspect of her life. As if sensing her growing despair, the ghostly manifestations escalated. One day, Helen was sitting at her computer when she heard footsteps in the attic above her. She dismissed them at first, assuming it was just the wind. But then she heard a loud crash followed by the distinct sound of dragging metal moans. Fear finally got the better of her, and she ran to the attic to investigate. What she found shocked her to her core. There in the middle of the floor was a large metal trunk, one that hadn't been there the day before. But it wasn't just the discovery of the chest that unnerved her, it was what came out of it. As soon as she opened the chest, a gust of cold air swept through the attic, causing the nearby lantern to swing wildly. Suddenly, the ghost of a little girl appeared, her translucent form shimmering in the dim light. Helen stood frozen with fear as the apparition approached her, reaching out a tiny hand before vanishing into thin air. This was more than just a moth or a draft. This was a ghost. A real, live specter from the past that was somehow connected to the trunk and the attic. What did it want from Helen, and why had it waited so long to reveal itself? These questions plagued her for weeks until one day she decided to seek professional help. A renowned paranormal investigator was called in to examine the house and uncover its dark secrets, using state-of-the-art equipment. He began exploring every nook and cranny of the property, determined to get to the bottom of the ghostly goings-on. His investigation led him to the attic, where he discovered something truly shocking. The floorboards in this area had been installed over a hidden pit, one that was likely used for illicit activities such as the storage or disposal of bodies. This was further confirmed by the presence of old bones and disturbing artifacts found within the pit. But the most compelling evidence came in the form of a diary. The investigator discovered an old leather-bound book hidden within the walls. Its yellowed pages chronicled the sinister activities of Helen's great-grandfather, detailing his illegal embalming and burial practices, as well as his obsession with the occult. With this new information in hand, the team was able to piece together the puzzle of the haunted house. They realized that the disturbances were not just random acts of poltergeist activity, but rather attempts by the spirits to communicate with the living. As it turned out, the little girl Helen had seen was the ghost of one of her great-grandfather's victims. He had kidnapped her and her family, using their bodies for nefarious purposes. The spirits of these poor souls were trapped in the house, unable to find peace until their tormentor was brought to justice. Armed with this knowledge, Helen and the investigators decided to take action. They held a seance in the attic, inviting the spirits to speak through them and reveal their story to the world. With the help of the ghost of the little girl, they were able to uncover the full extent of her great-grandfather's crimes, including the location of a hidden grave in the backyard. Once the spirits were given the chance to rest in peace, the haunting in the house ceased, and Helen was finally able to enjoy her home without fear or disturbance. In the end, it was a case of unfinished business. The spirits had remained in the house because their stories had not been told and their killer had not been brought to justice. But with the help of a little understanding and compassion, Helen was able to put their souls to rest. Now let's move on to another mysterious topic. Have you ever experienced something supernatural or unexplained? Share your story in the comments below, and who knows, it might just make for a great video. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on all our spooky and thrilling content. Thanks for watching.